It's been more than 2 years since the release of Elden Ring, a considerably long time for DLC to follow. So although the open world action RPG is FromSoftware's biggest game to date, with many players still combing for its secrets and besting its fiercest bosses, there may be some of us that may be feeling just a little rusty. And while we wouldn't say that's necessarily a factor in why Shadow of the Erdtree, the game's only expansion and the largest that the studio has ever made, feels like a considerable step up in difficulty, it certainly wants the player to be well equipped. Consider the fact that you'll have to have defeated Star Scourge Radahn, but also Mog Lord of Blood, a powerful optional boss that not everyone who's played the main game will even have fought yet. Given that the preset builds available for this hands-on all started at level 150, that gives you an idea of where FromSoftware wants you to be before making your way into the Land of Shadows. Enemies hit extremely hard, such is the case for the Black Gowl Knight, an early optional boss you'll find waiting in a crypt below an early section of the map. Brutal from a distance with their rapid firing crossbow, as they are with their sword up close. Then there's the Gravebirds, perched atop gravestones while en route to the crypt, that were responsible for the first of our many deaths. At the very least, you can use them as a summonable spiritash. We advise keeping away from the large giant with a huge forge for a body, because even if it doesn't stomp on you, you'll no doubt be engulfed by its flaming AoE attack that it produces. A good time to remind you that jumping is a viable tactic. Everything in Shadow of the Erdtree isn't out to get you from the off. It's a land of muted colours with the dark Erdtree standing oppressively in the distance. There's also many docile shadows wandering in the fields. It's a forlorn sight, but they also make for great low stakes punching bags to practice on. We had 3 builds to start from: the strength based warrior, the dexterity based knight, and the faith and intelligence based sorcerer. Each is equipped with completely new armour and weapons. We were told that there's more than 100 new weapons in this expansion, so even if you're stubbornly comfortable with the gear you already had in the base game, there's still going to be plenty of new lore from just the items themselves for you to feast on. Shadow of the Erdtree has new ways to aid you on your quest, known as blessings. Split into Scattered Tree blessings and Revered Ash blessings, these new items can be found as you explore and used at sites of grace to improve your attack and defense, and the defense of your spirit steed respectively. Much like golden seeds, the number required also goes up as you upgrade further. It's certainly one way to give you a leg up for players who might find themselves out of their depth. These blessings are also only effective within the Lands of Shadow, meaning they don't transfer back to the main game. You may also find assistance from some new characters while on this pilgrimage in this new land to find Michaelia, a mysterious character much talked about in the original game, as the elder twin brother of Millennia. The starting region predominantly split into 2 dungeons, a tower settlement called Bellarat to the northwest and Castle Ensis to the northeast. Their aesthetics don't feel too distinct from the ravaged forts of Limgrave, but each is as labyrinthine and treacherous as the legacy dungeons found in the base game, while its shadowy denizens are a lot more aggressive than those wandering out in the field. There's plenty to catch you out: a Bestia pointed in front of a long bridge that you're trying to cross, a large troll waiting at the end before you can reach the castle gate, a dog lurking just out of sight that I can't believe kept making us jump multiple times. And just when you think you've cleared one area of enemies, one more is waiting to pounce from behind a waterfall. Of course, it's the new bosses where things get very humbling. While we were recommended a specific order to tackle the dungeons in terms of difficulty, we still spent a considerable portion of the session getting battered by both. Divine Dancing Beast Lion recalls both Vicar Amelia and a large dancing lion brought out during Chinese New Year festivities. Indeed, beneath the majestic cloth draped over its body, it does look as if there's another being that forms its rear. It's a fast moving beast whose movements are tough to follow, arguably one that you'd rather not lock onto, but who you also then have to contend with introducing even more damaging elemental attacks as it changes phases throughout the fight. Judging by name alone, R'hllana, Twin Moon Knight, is almost certainly related to Rennala of the Carian royal family. They make for a formidable melee-based opponent based on just their blades. In some ways, being a humanoid boss meant we found her a little easier to engage with, just by slowly circling her and waiting for an opening, but all that went down the drain by the time she started bringing elemental spells into the fight, with fire and magic respectively. The latter had such a ridiculous range that it was enough to one-shot us. We had no answer. You're not left completely to your own devices, as it's possible to summon a few of Michaela's followers into the fight, More often than not, however, they feel more of a hindrance as it becomes trickier to read the action with multiple figures in a scrum, while you'll have to contend with the scaling benefits the boss receives when more allies are involved. We're afraid to say we left the session with the tail between our legs, but also with the dread that, whereas Limgrave had many smaller mini-bosses you could take on your way up to the Legacy Dungeon headliners, progress in Land of Shadow might be more impervious. This was of course not the final build, especially when given a relative limited portion of the map to explore, so there may be yet many caverns and catacombs just out of bounds, though attempts to scope out the ravaged village, as well as a flooded plain in the base game, didn't yield anything else. At this stage it's not clear how big the Land of Shadows map will even stretch out, and that's without taking into account any maps above or below ground. Given that the open world structure benefited Elden Ring by giving you the freedom to approach or avoid encounters at your own pace, I'd like to think that FromSoftware won't abandon that completely with this expansion. But even if it's too early to say whether or not Shadow of the Erdtree is a leaner package, from the first 3 hours, it's definitely meaner.